Welcome, Hotshots, to Flashlight by Firepower X. Here you can find the industrial strength tools you need to dominate your personal and professional wellness as a firefighter. And my name is Jess. I am boss lady here at Firepower X, former firefighter myself, and your host for today's webinar. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce today's special guest, paramedic firefighter Joseph Blunn of Crested, Butte Fire Protection District. Excuse me, that's a mouthful. He's spent 13 years in EMS, 11 of those as a paramedic or critical care paramedic for Colorado agencies, in addition to Crested Butte, but also Denver Health, AirLife, Rural Metro, in addition to time as a structural firefighter and wildland firefighter engine boss. And Joe is also retired from the Army Reserves after 23 years with multiple combat deployments to Iraq as a combat engineer. Welcome, Joe. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us today.
Thank you for having me. I just wanted to say I appreciate this opportunity to get a message out, and I really appreciate what you're doing with Firepower X, and look forward to seeing you succeed in the future.
Thank you. That's very heartfelt.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thank you for your service. What motivates
Thanks.
you to serve? I mean, you've really, gravitated towards service careers. What motivates you to serve?
Let me see. When I think about that question, I think about I kind of had a really rough upbringing. Kind of broken home. I spent some time when I was a teenager being homeless, and during that time, I always kind of felt like if people were just kind of given an opportunity to succeed, they would. And it kind of makes me think about what's intrinsic in people. And yes, there's some really good people out there. There's some not so good people as well. But I feel like everyone kind of deserves a chance. I will tell you what brought me into EMS and the fire service has more to do with probably my wartime experiences.
Mhm.
Uh, I spent a total of 49 months overseas, and between my third and fourth deployment, that's kind of when I decided, I really more like I had harmed prior to EMS. I worked as a roughneck on oil rigs, so this is a completely different career path. But I threw myself in, and I'll tell you when I finished EMT school and I got my first offer letter, and I looked at my starting pay, and I thought about how I was just leading combat patrols through Baghdad 6 months prior. It kind of hurt, but
Mhm.
I kind of looked at my EMT time as being like a paid internship. It's something we all have to do. You do your time, you do your reps, you learn, and then you build off of that.
Mhm.
I was really lucky to go to paramedic school at Denver Health, and they gave me a job right out of school. I was really grateful for that opportunity.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's kind of what motivates me to help other people.
Mhm. Awesome. And coming from the military into EMS and fire, what were like the key differences between those two cultures that you've seen?
Hmm. Let me see. The the odd thing about that question is when I started out on the wildland side, and again the wildland side came years after EMS, and then the structure side. But I I never found a job that was more applicable to the skills than what I did in the military. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is, small unit tactics, small teams, a very clear chain of command, communication.
Hmm.
Um, some days I joked that as you're in line going to a fire, if you blur your eyes and replace rifles with hand tools, it's the same thing.
Hmm.
That being said, there was a lot of there's more similarities than there are differences, and what I mean by that is the fire service in particular, very, very paramilitary organization with a chain of command, and so for me that was a very, very easy transition. I feel like the structure side of the fire department, because I was used to that organization, that structure, was actually a lot easier to transition to.
Hmm.
EMS, it depends on the organization and how you set the tone. You know, like there's places where it's very, very loose, a lot of different personalities. There are organizations that are very, very by the book. You park this way, you do things this way.
Hmm.
Yeah, you know, I would also say my time as an Army reservist kind of allowed me to walk that line. And what I mean is you know, like you have one foot in the organization, the chain of command, and one foot and the civilian world, and so it kind of allowed you to almost shapeshift into whatever organization, whatever their needs were. So.
Hmm. And let's start to kind of weave mental health into this because I know that was kind of the crux of what we wanted to talk about and being really candid about some of the challenges that come from not only, fire service, but also these outer rings of military, EMS, police, the other kind of public safety type jobs. So can you kind of touch on some of the challenges, like the 10,000 foot view of the challenges in mental health that
Right.
from these different positions that you've seen, the crossover between EMS, fire and military, and even oil rig? If you want to throw that experience in there too, of like, what are the commonalities and the differences of the, mental health challenges on these jobs?
Yeah. So when I think about that, I think about some various things. Um, and you know, your audience is more than likely first responders, fire, EMS, police, and so speaking to that audience, we see some things that, you know, it could be somebody's worst day in their entire life that's going to stick with them forever. And for us, it's a Tuesday, and it's a call before we eat lunch, you know.
Hmm.
And so, you know, what I observed is you you have very normal reactions to abnormal situations. It's not normal to see broken spirits, broken bodies, and yet we've made that into our profession. We routinely meet people on their worst days, and whether it's mental health issues, and a failure to thrive, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, or completely broken apart bodies. You know, whether that's in war or stabbing, shootings in the cities, rock falls and rural environments. All of that stuff adds up. So, you know, you asked me a question about some of the commonalities between military and fire and EMS. And one thing that I would say, and kind of the reason that I came here today to talk about this would be substance abuse.
Hmm.
So, you know, I joined the Army Reserves when I was 17 years old,
Hmm.
and when I was 18, I graduated basic training, and you know, right during our graduation ceremony, we're singing the engineer song, which is it's a drinking song.
Hmm.
um, you know, fast forward to the oil rig, and you know, it was you would work 100-hour weeks, 7 days on, 7 days off, just really, really hard work, which means that you had to decompress on your days off. And then, you know, same thing. When I got into EMS, I noticed a culture of alcohol use in particular.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, I'll give you an example. So in Denver, it was very common if you got off of work, say 11 to midnight, uh, you would meet at one of the paramedic bars, because they close at 2. If you got off at 2 a.m., you would meet your friends in the park and drink till 5 or 6. And if you got off early in the morning, say 5 6 a.m., you would meet at one of the bars that opened at 8 a.m. and started serving booze. And so culturally, that just became the norm. Very very prevalent in the urban system. It's prevalent in the rural system. However, I would definitely say it's more subdued, but it definitely exists. So
Hmm.
why do I bring this up? I think substance abuse and mental health go hand in hand. And what I mean by that is, when you're exposed to all of these traumas over and over again, you need a way to cope. A lot of people turn to alcohol, and when you ask yourself, well, why alcohol? Especially because, when we're in a profession where we see the results of drunk driving, and we see the results of domestic violence and all of these things on a regular basis, why would we partake in something that's so destructive?
Hmm.
And when I really think about it, it's socially acceptable and it's legal, right?
Hmm.
You have a very normal reaction to abnormal situations, and you need a way to calm your mind down. And unfortunately, a lot of people they turn to substance abuse, and
Hmm.
so I think observing that and then watching the negative effects that it has within our community is kind of why I think it's important that we talk about this. Um, you know, if you're in the audience and you're watching this, maybe this is something you can relate to. Maybe you're listening to the words I'm saying right now and you're like, that's absolutely not correct. And if that's the camp you're in, I want you to take a really honest assessment, because you may not be in that situation yourself. And if you're not, that's amazing. But
Hmm.
if you were to take a like the 1,000 foot view, like you had said at the industry, it's really a problem, and I think it's something that we need to focus on and sort of address and
Hmm.
figure out a way to move past this in the future.
Hmm. I totally agree, and I agree with your theory that it's socially acceptable. Like it's very close to like how do a lot of civilians deal with their own traumas? They drinking too, and then
Right.
drinking is such a social thing. Um, and I wanted to kind of unpack like any other reasons also why people might, be turning to this because to kind of self-soothe, because I would assume that's why we drink. It's not just social, it's also an escape from overthinking. You kind of get out of your own head, you're a little more in your body. And it's not unlike other vices that are more obvious when you're using them, like, meth, you get the sores, your teeth are falling out. Like, I feel like alcohol is a little bit more, the signs are more subtle, right, of when you're using it. And that does allow people to kind of indulge. And it is such a part of fire culture. I mean, I hate to say that because
Yeah.
I remember, I mean, even at McMurdo, where I deployed for a couple of seasons, we had like day bar. As soon as we would get off, we'd go to day bar and we would be there
Yeah.
all day. Um, and so, yeah, that it even follows us like to kind of these more remote positions, um, because it is so available. What's kind of, has anyone started to question this? Have you seen, besides yourself, has anyone kind of brought up like, wow, we drink a lot, you know? Um, eh,
Um,
have you seen any kickback?
yeah, I have actually. And first I'm going to say, I didn't realize they had a day bar in Antarctica. That's awesome and bad all at the same time.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so I'm just gonna self-disclose. I had a really really bad drinking problem, and it got in the way of a lot of things. And
Hmm.
when I look back at things, it affected me negatively with personal relationships. I had a failed marriage. that definitely, like, whether I wanted to admit it or not, it definitely affected my work performance.
Hmm.
And For me, when I look back at things, I reached a low in March of 2020. It was the start of the pandemic,
Hmm.
and I had a lot of personal things going on, and I had reached a level of drinking that was completely not sustainable. Um, and subsequently, I had to take a step back, and and I ended up doing 1,000 days of sobriety.
Hmm.
And a lot of this was people telling me you have to follow this, and even after I had proven I can stay sober, I continued my journey with sobriety.
Hmm.
And it was hard. It was really hard because I'll tell you this, like during 2020 in particular, not only were we running EMS calls, but on my days off, I worked at a COVID homeless shelter
Hmm.
in Denver. And I had this, like, I'm gonna just tell you, it was a naive thought. It was like, if everybody just like does their part and kicks in, we'll get past this.
Hmm.
Um, and I was working 7 days a week. I was seeing some pretty horrific things, and I was doing all of this completely sober. And Ironically enough, I needed a break from EMS and from COVID to the point where I volunteered for my first fire deployment because of that.
Hmm.
But nonetheless, getting back on track, I went to that through that 1,000 days of sobriety, and
Hmm.
I did it to prove to myself that I could.
Hmm.
And then after that, I revisited my relationship with alcohol, and it was not the same,
Hmm.
and I think now I'm gonna say I don't necessarily recommend just going cold turkey right away, especially if like you're in the audience and you're like, you know what, maybe I do drink so much. I My recommendation is find a motivator to keep you sober, and find something else that's healthy to kind of release to replace that. But um, I might go on a small tangent here, but concurrent to all my alcohol use, I've done plenty of therapy as well over the past 20 years. I've gone through individual therapy, group therapy, cognizant process therapy. I've done EMDR. I've done substance abuse. I'm currently involved in some ketamine treatment,
Hmm.
and I'm doing all of these things over the course of those 2 decades, sort of to find the tools in my own toolbox where I don't need alcohol. I don't need any of the stuff I was using to cope with these traumatic experiences.
Hmm.
Um, and Yeah, I this part might sound a little weird, but I have told people in the past, I think working EMS in Denver for me was worse than going to Iraq. And
Wow.
what I mean by that is, if I go to if I go to war, I expect to see and do certain things. You
Hmm.
go to war, you come home, you think about some of those things now and then, but there's a separation. When you're working EMS where you live, it's a little different though, because if I'm like trying to decompress a cardiac arrest who is just shot in a 7-Eleven, I look up and I'm like, oh, I get coffee here sometimes. And
Hmm.
so, seeing those traumatic things really brings it home.
Hmm.
Um, Circling back, like, I don't necessarily, how do I say this? I found a lot of value in therapy, but
Hmm.
I also don't think it's a silver bullet for everything.
Hmm.
Um, and so again, circling back, I don't think alcohol is the way to go, but that's what I was using. That's what I was using to cope.
Hmm.
It was really bad. Um, I paid a very high price for my alcohol use,
Hmm.
and I struggled to stay sober. And now that I've gotten over that hill, um, it's the easiest thing.
Hmm.
It's both the like hardest and easiest thing I've ever done in my life.
Hmm. Interesting. Unpack
Yeah.
that. Why? Why? What do you mean by
You,
that?
you know, when I say it's the hardest thing, what I mean by that is, um, I had to find a reason to not drink. I had to find a reason to stay sober,
Hmm.
and the inverse of that is like once I found that reason, it's the easiest thing. And
Hmm.
so I'll tell you, I have a 6 month old son right now,
Hmm.
and during his mother's pregnancy, I made that commitment. I told you I did 1,000 days of sobriety. I revisited my relationship with alcohol, and it was, even though it was a lot healthier, it was not there. There's no healthy relationship with alcohol.
Yeah.
I will admit, like, the social aspect is great, but like if you ever reach a point where like you're drinking non-socially, it's not healthy. And so yeah, my reason was because I wanted to be a positive influence for my son. I
Hmm.
wanted to break that generational trauma that people deal with,
Hmm.
and my whole goal is to raise a solid human being.
Hmm.
And I cannot do that if I have some whiskey in me.
Yeah.
It is impossible to like pick up a newborn with a whiskey in your hand and like think that's not going to affect care.
Yeah.
So once I found that reason, and again, uh, for anyone listening, you're gonna have to find your own reason. But once you find that reason and it's true to you, um, it's so easy. It's easy for me to not drink now.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you find your values changed when you became a father as
Oh,
well?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. You know, everything everything that is involved in decision making right now,
Hmm.
um, whether it's whether it's a financial choice, even choices. Should I pick up an overtime shift or not? One of the unhealthy coping skills I had with my both my wartime and EMS PTSD was I would overwork. It would be a coping skill, and
Hmm.
since my son was born, I was working PRN at another EMS agency. I was an adjunct instructor at one of the community colleges for their paramedic program. I quit all of those.
Hmm.
This is the first time since I was 18 years old that I've had one job,
Hmm.
and the reason is because I want to spend that quality time with my son, and I don't want to miss the little things,
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, it's definitely changed my priorities. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's really an interesting observation. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that of like overworking also as a potential vice, how we kind of shift our attention and focus into, you know, um, certain coping skills. And that is definitely, I have seen that
Right.
as
Right.
well of people who are chronically busy. They're just so busy
Yeah.
and they just, it's interesting. I don't think people acknowledge that too much of that behavior can be covering up something that you're feeling or it's soothing in some way to you. Um, but so since you've had, I would get a good experience with therapy. What do you agree with break the
Yeah.
stigma? Do you
Yeah.
agree with that
So,
messaging?
uh, um, uh, going back to what you were just talking about,
Hmm.
it's interesting you brought up the overworking, and
Uh-huh.
the reason I bring that up is because, um, there was a part in my life in between deployments where I did not drink,
Hmm.
right? And but what I was doing is I was working those 100 hours a week on the oil rigs,
Hmm.
and I felt great. I went to therapy. I got some tools. It was awesome. And then I had no symptoms for a while, and
Hmm.
that's what I thought. It was inaccurate. The truth is that I was just overworking. I was working so much that like I didn't have time to engage in what was going on in my own mind.
Hmm.
Um, and once I stopped working all those hours, that's when the things popped up, and that's actually what started the drinking. And and initially it it helped. It helped me go to sleep. I thought, obviously, on a physiological level, that's not true at all. But and then it just progressed and got worse. And so, to answer your question about therapy, though,
Hmm.
um, it would have been easy for me to just toss therapy to the side.
Hmm.
And going back to before I started ketamine, again, just to reiterate, individual groups, CPT, EMDR, I had done all of that. And yet, even with everything I learned with those tools in my toolbox, I still turned to drinking to cope, right? And so it'd
Hmm.
been easy for me to like toss therapy to the side and say it doesn't work.
Hmm.
But not only am I partaking in sobriety now, I'm re-engaging therapy with ketamine treatment
Hmm.
again because of my son.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, let's talk about therapy.
Hmm.
It works for some people and it's amazing. For other people, it definitely has less of an effect, right? So I'll give you an
Hmm.
example. I have a really bad uh, kind of flashback triggers, right? As a combat engineer, I did route clearance, and so loud bangs like initiate like this physiological response.
Hmm.
And like going back to like when we were a caveman, like you walk out of your cave, like there's a saber-toothed tiger. What happens, right? Your eyes dilate, your heart beats faster, you vasoconstrict to bring the blood to your core. All these things are awesome because it's allowed us as a species to evolve and like survive. The
Hmm.
problem is that there's nothing in your brain to shut that off, and
Hmm.
so you experience those same stressors. Your body goes into this thing that keeps you alive
Hmm.
in a place where it's completely it's not appropriate, right?
Hmm.
So I've picked up tools here and there. One of the things I've learned was tactile grounding, where you pick up something in your hands, whether it be a phone, a wallet, keys, whatever
Hmm.
it is, and you focus on the weight, the texture, all of that stuff. You do something as simple as like tell yourself the date, and that like just checks your brain, like, oh yeah, here's where I am. I'm good. I'm not
Hmm.
at war. And so these are tools that I have found very helpful.
Hmm.
Now, that being said, I've said there's no silver bullet.
Hmm.
Um, I think this is a multifaceted approach,
Hmm.
and you getting those, a lot of talk therapy, for instance, is more about self realization and like why your brain thinks the way it does.
Hmm.
Cognitive process therapy, that's all it is. It does nothing about like trauma exposure. It's more of an educational process. Here's why my brain works the way it does, and a
Hmm.
lot of people find that really helpful.
Hmm.
For people in your audience, however, I feel like it's a little different, and the reason being is because you could spend years focusing on a traumatic event, um, but like going back to the beginning of this conversation, somebody's worst day of their life could be a Tuesday before lunch for us.
Hmm.
So how do you process all that stuff and continue to process it in a healthy way?
Hmm.
I think therapy gives you a lot of those tools, but you need to go into it with an open mind, right? Um, now, I think you and I have kind of varying opinions about what's good versus what's bad with therapy, and I again, like I just think that like if you go into it with an open mind, take it for what it is, recognize that it is not going to solve all your problems. This is a multifaceted, multi-year, could be a multi-generational thing that you're gonna deal with.
Hmm.
um I compare it to a work industry injury, right? Like you go on a call, you lift a patient the wrong way, you injure your back. You're gonna have to like rehab that injury, right?
Hmm.
You may not ever get back to 100% of where you were, but you could get back to like being functional again. And I think it's the same thing with like these moral injuries that you experience whenever you see these traumatic events over and over.
Hmm.
Your brain may not ever be the same. It's never going to forget those things, but you can learn to live in a healthy way and have those tools to like adapt and carry on with your life.
Hmm. I definitely agree that um, therapy is one of several things you can try, right? When I was in some pretty dark places, I made a list, and therapy was one of them. And there's so many factors. I think if you get a good therapist and you guys have a good connection, like that definitely helps the process. If you don't, if you get a dud, then uh it affects the process too. So I
Well,
also
and and
just
and, and on that though, it has to be that relationship has to exist. I'm
yeah,
I'm sorry for
yeah,
cutting you off, but like you cannot just go to a therapist and say, let's talk. You
yeah,
you have to vibe with that person. And
yeah,
I'm just gonna say that's so paramount because even if you have to like shop around, by all means do that. Like find someone you could talk to and if you can't talk to this person, what's the point? Like you're
yeah,
wasting your time, their time, wasting money.
yeah,
Um, yeah, you got to have that relationship.
exactly. I also have a wild conspiracy theory that Break the
Okay.
Stigma was started by a bunch of therapists who were looking for a new marketing strategy. But um, yeah, because it did. People do get mixed results, I think. And do you think it's the actual stigma that holds people back from seeking therapy or trying other things?
Um, so I'm actually glad that you brought up break the stigma.
Yeah.
And I'm glad because like conferences you go to, wellness is like we all could go to our fire stations, our EMS stations, and we see the EAP flyer hanging up. We're like, hey, if you're having problems, call this number, 6 free sessions, blah blah blah, right? Um, uh, so like it's no secret that the military has had a problem with suicides.
Hmm.
An interesting thing to think about is between Iraq and Afghanistan, there's been a little over 7,000 soldiers who have died in combat. Compare that to the over 300,000 who have committed suicide.
Wow.
Um, yeah, yeah. Since the global war on terror, over 300,000 service members have killed themselves. That is a tremendous difference, right? On a personal note, I know two suicides from Dimmer Health. One suicide happened in Crested.
Hmm.
I know seven service members personally who have committed suicide, and so I can confidently say I know more people have committed suicide than have died in the 49 months I've spent in combat, right?
Hmm.
And as a result, we're all like, let's do something, and so we say, break the stigma, come forward. Well, that sounds great, but what's not great about that is I think that as an industry, we half-ass that. So I'm gonna give a couple examples. So um, I deployed with somebody on my third deployment. Amazing soldier. He came back. He had some mental health issues. He sought treatment. He did everything that he was told he was supposed to do.
Hmm.
Still a really good soldier. And he actually we came up for deployment again, and this is a slower tempo than what had been a few years prior. And so they looked at his record and saw that he had sought mental health treatment. He had done the thing that he was told to do, and he was kept off that deployment because of that. Subsequently, he left the service because he's like, well, if you're not going to use me for deployment, what am I doing? Like,
Hmm.
And so the military lost a good soldier because they essentially they said do this if you have problems, but then we're going to hold it against you. On a personal note, same thing. I had sought some mental health treatment,
Hmm.
and I was kept from schools, and
Hmm.
I was kept from promotion because of this. And when I found out that this profile existed,
Hmm.
because I had sought mental health treatment, I had it removed.
Hmm.
Now, this did two things. One, it allowed me to, like, now that it's off my record, right? It
Hmm.
allowed me to go to these schools. It allowed me to get promoted, but it also hampered my ability to seek help in the future, right?
Hmm.
And so, like, I had another mental health crisis towards the end of 18 into 19. I
Hmm.
was still a member of the military, and I sought treatment. I got help, but I I never told my chain of command, and I
Hmm.
didn't do it because we've created this culture where we say come forward, but we're going to hold it against you, you
Yeah.
know. And that may not be the intent, but that's the reality, right? And
Hmm.
so how does this translate to the fire service? Going back to the fireman who injures themselves on a lift, right? They hurt their back. They get treatment. They go to rehab. They come back. Maybe they're on light duty. They eventually rehab, and they're back to full duty. Fast forward 2 years, that person's up for promotion, and it's not a problem, right? Like, yeah, it's not a question. Like, you qualify, we're going to promote you.
Hmm.
Now let's pretend that same firefighter has a mental health crisis because he's on a pediatric drowning. He has a
Hmm.
normal response to an abnormal situation,
Hmm.
and who's to say, like, again, we say break the stigma, but in 2 years, if that firefighter goes up for promotion, even though he goes to therapy, even though he does all that, who's to say that command's not going to be like, should we promote this guy? He had some suicidal ideation 2 years ago,
Hmm.
completely ignoring the fact that we say break the stigma. You're not. You're encouraging a culture of people to uh, hide their mental health issues.
Hmm.
Now, let's talk about substance abuse. To me, mental health and substance abuse, those two things go hand in hand.
Hmm.
Why? Because you have these normal situations, these normal responses, abnormal situations, and you self-soothe. And a lot of ways the industry self-soothes is by drinking too much.
Hmm.
Um, and again, I think there's value in saying break the stigma, but
Hmm.
I think that culturally we haven't actually done that.
Yeah.
And if anyone is listening to this and is like absolutely, like, I'm fearful for that, or I'm in a command position, I didn't maybe realize that perspective. uh I think if we have an honest conversation with ourselves about where we are, that's the only way to address some of these shortcomings.
Hmm. That's why I think the therapists were behind this messaging because they don't understand the political implications of, yeah, when you
Right.
do come forward, you get the scarlet
Yeah.
letter. So why would
Yeah.
anyone come forward? It has nothing to do with the stigma. It's because nobody feels safe to come forward. And then, like you said,
Right.
when they do, you get punished for it. So why would you come forward? So it kind of sounds like it's, a lot of the decision makers that need to break the
Yeah.
stigma. Like they need to quit
Yeah.
being so, the HR departments
Yeah.
for fire, at least they need to be a little more understanding and flexible, I think, about mental health because it's true. You can recover and move on and find a new motivator for your habits, right? And really, turn the corner. Um, and it is. And then, the gossip chain too is also problematic
Yeah.
because that's one thing I found in the fire service. We love to talk about each other, we
Yeah.
um, behind the scenes. And that it's funny. It's like nobody can actually make a mistake because then like
Right. Right.
it's hard to recover from that. Like you can't, it's,
Um,
reputation wise.
yeah. Listening to your talk, and uh, it just had me thinking because you asked the question like why come forward, right?
Hmm.
And so I think the reason I want to talk about this is because rewind the clock 5 years ago, and man, my employer probably had every reason in the book to get rid of me, right?
Hmm.
Uh, hey man, you drink too much. You have some mental health problems, like, uh, and on a personal level, I found those motivators to fix that,
Hmm.
and now that I'm at work, like, you know, uh, I'm could consider myself one of the top performers in my department,
Hmm.
and so I think that like it coming at it from that perspective, if I were to like step forward and say, hey guys, like let's talk about this. Here's why I got this personal experience with this.
Hmm.
People may be closer to listen to that, coming from somebody who's been able to move past that versus somebody who's deep in it, right?
Hmm.
And so circling back to what you talked about, the decision makers, um, I think this is worth the conversation because I hate to use the word that this is generational,
Hmm.
but you have boomers and some elder Gen Xers
Hmm.
who are in those decision making roles, and
Hmm.
they may say all of the words they're supposed to, but breaking years and years of generational thinking is hard to do.
Hmm.
So I have hope that there are some younger Gen Xers, some millennials coming in. Eventually, the Gen Zers and then Gen Alphas are going to take all of our jobs. But that's awesome because these younger generations have a different perspective where they may not actually stigmatize that, right? So you say the um, the mental health industry it like made break the stigma.
Hmm.
uh I could totally see that.
Hmm.
um but I don't think it's like a malicious thing. I think it's really trying to break the mindset of this older generation who's still in charge
Hmm.
now. When I said I had hope that some of these younger generations will change that mindset, I do hold true to that. However, you're not going to snap your finger. It's not going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I think having these conversations and bringing up this awareness is a start to it. Hopefully, you have some older generations who listen to this messaging and self analyze and really determine, am I doing what's right for my department and my people,
Hmm.
versus nope, I came up and this was very black and white. This is how it is. That's how I'm gonna. That's how, let's just put it as it is. That's how I'm gonna rule it. Um, and so, yeah, it's a slow process. But you know what else is a slow process? Therapy, rehabbing an injury,
Yeah.
getting better, finding those reasons. Nothing is
Hmm.
very quick. It takes the work, and we have to put in the work.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I want to circle back to a nugget that while you were talking, that came up for me of the departments recognizing that someone who may be going through some stuff and using substances to cope, they have there's value in that because that person has a
yeah,
really strong motivator, right? They're feeling something really deeply. And I think it
yeah,
would actually like that's the best time to find something else that you like when you feel that deep into it. Like it's not when you're apathetic and you're over whatever it is. It's when you're in the trenches of that feeling, when you have the most momentum behind that to find
yeah.
something different and throw yourself in like 100%. That's what
Right.
I've found because in my darkest times, I just have so much I'm overthinking so much and it's easy for my attention to go somewhere else and a relief for my attention to go somewhere else and to pour that energy somewhere else.
Yeah,
So that, I mean, I've never heard anyone talk about that of just recognizing that, if you want to retain your employees, like acknowledge that this may be a challenging time for them, but it's also a good time for you as a department to kind of rally around them and give them the tools that they could really catapult themselves out of what they're experiencing with
I
so
think
much more
that,
force.
yeah, I was going to say, I think that's actually a really good point. Because when I was listening to your words just now, and I thought back to rewind the clock 5 years ago when I was in the depths of it, there was no self recognition,
Yeah.
and had had somebody come up and like, hey man, I noticed you're having problems. Let's talk about this. Let's get you through this, and then like work on that. That would have been tremendously helpful.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, you self soothe, and
Hmm.
you get yourself. None of us recognize that we're doing bad until we find that rock bottom for ourselves.
Yeah.
And being able to like course correct would have been extremely helpful. I did not do that, and it took that rock bottom to like pull myself up.
Hmm.
But I think you have a very valid point, because if you could recognize within a coworker that they're having those difficulties, and like have that honest conversation with them, and help give them the tools to course correct themselves, you're going to retain a really solid employee. um you're and again, like, I almost hate using the word employee in the fire
Hmm.
service, because these
Yeah.
are people you spend 24, 48, 72 hours at a time with.
Hmm.
You eat with them, you sleep next to them, you go on these calls, and like you really, you train, you count on these people to have your back, and vice versa.
Yeah.
um yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about there's these people that you spend more time with, and sometimes your own family, and
Hmm.
being able to retain that, and you know like not get rid of them in lieu of like someone brand new you have to get to know and train, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of value in that.
Hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. And
Yeah,
the power of those connections. Because every time I've been pulled aside, because I've worked both in the fire service and in civilian jobs, obviously, and
yeah,
yeah, those bonds are so much deeper in fire. And for someone to come to you at that point who you trust and, one of your brothers and sisters, and they're like, dude, what's going on with you? Like
yeah,
that has so much more profound, like there's a lot of opportunity in that for peer
and I
support beyond what you sign up, you get assigned, so that peer support to me in the fire service is 24/7. Like it's at the kitchen table,
absolutely.
it's on the truck, it's at lunch, it's on the call, like it never ends. And
And you're vested in one another to
yeah.
be successful, so
Yeah. So before we kind of start wrapping things up, I know, we had talked offline about it's okay to not be okay and that messaging too. Did you have
yeah,
anything that you kind of wanted to touch on that before we?
yeah. It's okay to not be okay. So I came to you, and I said that that was an important message to
Uh-huh.
me, and you gave me some pushback, because of like some of the experiences with therapy, and kind of like how that was received, right?
Hmm.
And so I was thinking about that the last couple of days, and I think what's important is if we're gonna stick to something like break the stigma, it's okay to not be okay. We need to follow through on that.
Hmm.
And I know we talked about it a little bit with some of this like generational change, and culture change in our own mindset, and then how we approach these problems. And I think you might have dialed it in way better than I could have when you were talking about personal relationships and how we're vested in one another. But yeah, I just want to just reiterate that is that if we're gonna have these mantras, we need to we need to actually follow through with that, and with the ultimate goal being we're retaining our trained, dedicated people, and we're getting them through some really rough times. And I'll say this: if you have a firefighter, paramedic, police officer, member of the military who's having a rough time, I just want to reiterate: these people are experiencing a completely normal reaction to abnormal situations. and it's no different than if you lift a patient wrong, you sustained an injury.
Hmm.
Let's rehab one another and get better.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my fear to clarify on camera with the it's okay to not be okay is I get concerned that the fire service is going to get used to victimhood. Like we're so, for so long, we've been in the hero complex. Like we're heroes. We show up, we do the job, we don't feel bad when we go home. Um, but then this kind of huge pendulum swing to it's okay to feel like shit all the time. Like that, the acceptance of that, like I just don't want to see it turn into like we all feel like shit all the time and that's how it is and we don't ever
Yeah.
this learned helplessness of like we don't ever help, that's just how this job goes. um
So I'm going to
so
push back on
okay,
that
push,
one.
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think, although in principle I would agree with you, I
Hmm.
think it goes back to that mindset, right? And so one end of the pendulum is like you said, like, nope, we're heroes, and one end is we're victims. My pushback is that we change that mindset to accept things as they are, and that is that I'm going to run a pediatric drowning. I'm going to have to tell a mother that their child is dead, and that's gonna fuck with me for a little while. I'm
Hmm.
sorry about my language
You're
there,
fine. You're fine.
but uh, yeah, so that's going to affect me. That's going to affect any normal human being who has to do that job. But just like in industry, let's recognize and rehab that, right, with intent that you're going to get back to as good as you can. Because if you don't rehab that injury, especially if you have moral injuries like that, you're going to turn to these things to self-soothe, like alcohol, like poor choices, right? and
Hmm.
and then this is where the downward spiral stops. So my pushback is here. I don't think it has to be a black and white this or that.
Hmm.
I think if we change our mindset to accept like this happened, let's get back to like being functional and
Hmm.
being able to serve our community,
Hmm.
serve other people. That's the reason we got into this. Now, if
Hmm.
you go the complete victimhood route, you're never going to get back there, right? That's like I hate going back to you lift a patient the wrong way, but if you sustain a back injury and you do no rehab, you're never going to be able to lift again, right? So like, what are you doing? Um,
Hmm.
yeah, get that, like do what you can to rehab that injury, or maybe consider something else.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's where some of that pushback is.
Yeah. No, I understand. Thanks. I'm happy to debate
Yeah,
these topics anytime.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so I kind of like to leave people at the end of all of our interviews with one tool or resource. What would you point people towards in the vein of this conversation we've had today that you found helpful?
Um, I was thinking about this, and I actually think about two books that uh, that I have read. One, I was like a brand new paramedic, and I was like, "Oh, this guy's awesome!" And now I read his stuff as like a more experienced paramedic, and I'm like, "Oh, some of the stuff's probably a little embellished." But
Hmm.
Lights and Sirens by Kevin Grange
Hmm.
was a good EMS book. And then one book I really enjoyed um, is uh, is My War, Killing Time in Iraq. It's by Colby Buzzall.
Hmm.
And these two books have something very much in common. They were written by people who were in the depths of that, and towards the end of the book, they have their own self-reflection, right? And so like the reason I find value in this is because you're reading, whether it's the EMS side or the war side, you're reading from the perspective of the author who's like in it. They're doing it every day.
Hmm.
But then towards the end, like with Lights and Sirens, the guy pulls back and he writes about how negatively all those hours had affected his family life. He talks about the drinking,
Hmm.
and he talks about the value in finding other things than running those calls. And
Hmm.
same with Colby, like when he's writing about like an ambush, uh, and in Baghdad, and well, he was in Mosul, but he's in the middle of it, and then towards the end, he's like, "Here's how this affected me." So
Hmm.
the reason I bring both those up is because it's the same thing. 5 years ago, I was in my lowest point. I was drinking too much. I had a mental health crisis,
Hmm.
and I had to pull myself out of that. And I think I'm a better person for that. And hopefully, I'm going to do a very solid job at raising a decent human being.
Hmm.
um, that being said, I just want I, I just want whoever's listening to this to know, like, whatever your motivator is to get well,
Hmm.
find that and then do it, right. And again, there's no one size fit all, there's no silver bullet to make that happen.
Hmm.
Find your motivator, stick to it. You'll get through this. And then the way you can help your fellow firemen, paramedics, EMTs, police officers, is if you recognize a coworker who may not recognize they're in a bad spot like that, help them out. Have that honest conversation with them.
Hmm.
And I think by doing all this, then we may slowly be able to right the ship and
Hmm.
retain some solid people.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's the people that feel the deepest, I think, that often are in, have challenges. That's what it felt like from my perspective. I was like, I'm just feeling
That's
all
fair.
this too intensely. I gotta find something to fix that. So yeah, it's the people who really care, I think, deep down, and they are solid employees and deserve, just as much chance. We all deserve those second chances. So awesome.
I
Any
agree.
closing thoughts, Joe? Anything else you want to leave our viewers with before we sign off for
You
today?
know, I would say, if you feel like you have a solid message to help the industry out,
Mhm.
throw it out. Like send you a message, and let's talk about it. Because again, like, it's a really small world, and you meet a lot of people in conferences, on calls, on wildland deployments.
Mhm.
uh, but you may have like a really good idea that could become best practices, and the only way that's going to get pushed through is if you talk about it. So
Mhm.
um, my closing statement would be, let's open a dialogue with one another and just keep talking and get better.
Mhm. Awesome. I
Yeah,
love it. Thank you so much, Joe, for coming on today and sharing
appreciate it.
your story. And a big thank you to our community members. If you're still watching, you're amazing. If you made it this far, as always, my door is open to you. If you have any feedback or questions after this interview, we will link all of the resources Joe mentioned down in the description box of the video. And my email again is info@firepowerx.com if you want to reach out, and we will see you in the next webinar. Thanks for watching.